Hi there, this is Nick Tate. I'm super excited to be part of the new documentary, The Eagle Has Landed. An exclusive look starts now.
50 years ago, an icon was born. The Eagle transporter is one of the greatest sci-fi spacecraft ever conceived. To this day, the design provokes an intense devotion among countless fans around the world. The question is, why? I'm writer-director Jeffrey Morris. I've been enamored with the Eagle since I first saw it in the TV series Space 1999 back in 1975. As a child who followed the Apollo program, the Eagle felt like a direct descendant of NASA's lunar module. Those transformative moon missions left an indelible impact on a generation, as did the Eagle in Space 1999. Over the years, I've discovered that I'm just one of millions of fans who has an affection for the Eagle and a nostalgia for a future we never achieved. So I'm shooting a feature documentary about the origins of this beloved ship, while also exploring its ongoing cultural impact. And I'm inviting you to join me. I'll be speaking with the Eagle's designer, visual effects wizard Brian Johnson. I'll also chat with Nick Tate, the actor who played legendary pilot Captain Alan Carter. It's going to be an epic journey as I travel around the globe to speak with Eagle aficionados and luminaries from the worlds of science and science fiction. As for myself, the visionary world building in Space 1999 blew my mind. It ultimately inspired me to become a filmmaker and production designer. I'm the creator of hard sci-fi projects such as the forthcoming deep space adventure Persephone, the apocalyptic underwater thriller Oceanus, and the universe-hopping techno-fantasy Parallel Man. Now I'm bringing all of my experience and passion to the creation of this documentary. The good news is we've already begun production. We self-financed a shoot in Louisville, Kentucky at Wonderfest, where I spoke with lifelong Eagle fans from around the country. They shared passionate stories about the iconic vessel and the aspects that make it so memorable. Then I traveled to Colorado, where I interviewed Kevin J. Anderson, the best-selling author of books set in the Dune, Star Wars, and X-Files universes. He also happens to be a huge fan of Space 1999. Recently, Kevin and I co-authored the novelization of my film Persephone. We had a blast discussing our mutual love of the Eagle and what it represents. Yet, there's still plenty left to do. I have to hire production crews at locations around the world. I also need to create visual effects and music. And of course, it all has to be edited together at a level that will rival any award-winning documentary. Now I'm asking for your assistance in completing the voyage. Check out our Kickstarter. There are tons of great rewards and even a couple of awesome stretch goals. A future began 50 years ago, and its time is now. Become a supporter of The Eagle Has Landed.
Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of science fiction, fantasy, cinema, whatever, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course the as yet undefined, although it was given a great definition on one of the comment sections of a recent Robservations. I gotta go look it up. Your existential Mr. Rogers, that's right, me. Robert Meyer Burnett, and this is Robservations, the show about something. Robservations episode number 890. Wow, we've 10 more episodes to the 900th episode, of which I'm trying to put together another spectacular. As many people who are longtime viewers of this channel know, whenever I reach a milestone, I will try and do a 900-minute show. But that requires a lot of interviews I'm trying to put together, and I have to do them relatively quickly because sometime in October, probably, depending on how many shows I do. I've got a lot going on in October. I'm shooting in Portland again, doing all kinds of stuff in October. Lots of stuff going on. But we'll see. I think I'm going to hit it. So we'll see what the 900th show of Robservations will bring you. My God, that's amazing. 900 shows. That means sometime close, maybe after the first of the year, the 1,000th show. I can't even imagine. But anyway, before I get into the topic at hand, there's a couple of things I want to deal with. As many people know, there has been back and forth with a member of the channel, Tony Oliver, who was upset with me. We have member calls. If you're a member of this channel, every other week, try and make it every other week, we have long membership calls. We had one this weekend where it usually starts at 11 a.m. on a Saturday, and they usually go, but I mean, they've gone to 4 or 5. They've been long. But sometimes, they usually last at least 3 to 4 hours, something in there. And Tony Oliver had came into a member chat, and he, I guess he wanted to show me a potential film project he's working on, which, by the way, is not appropriate for a member chat, but he wanted to do that. And during that member chat, the power in our neighborhood went out. Edison came out here. They were able to fix it, and I went back onto that member chat a couple hours later. People were still talking, even though I wasn't there. Love you guys. And he was there. Tony Oliver was there on the member chat, and I tried to get him to unmute. I didn't know anything about what he wanted, or I hadn't really spoken to him in a member chat before, but he didn't. He was talking to other people. We could see him, but he didn't come back into the chat. He didn't sit down and unmute and talk. So I didn't know what was going on. He was very incensed. He's written me and a couple other people on this channel letters to express his discontent. I'm going to put this to bed. I got an email saying, "Hey, Robert, this comes to us from just name. It comes from name. No reply, name." And the subject headline was, "Please know more about the disgruntled soon-to-be filmmaker." And this letter says, "Hey, Robert, I've been trying to catch your show more often recently, and twice I've heard the story about the disgruntled soon-to-be filmmaker. It disturbed me, especially the second time. Please be careful and maybe avoid talking about disgruntled soon-to-be filmmakers in the future." Well, look, I like to, as anyone who watches this channel knows, you can send me a letter at postgeeksingularity.com. It's free, and, I feel touched and moved and obligated when people write me letters, as long as they're appropriate to share with the public at large. I feel an obligation to do so. If somebody takes the time to write me a letter, I feel that's pretty good. So, I want to do that, especially if people want to call me out. I always encourage a dissenting voice. If you think what I'm saying is BS, please write and tell me so. But I would appreciate it if you have an articulated argument as to why, because I look at that as a learning opportunity. Okay. So I did get another letter from Tony. Another letter was sent into the channel. This will be the last one. 3 strikes, you're out. This is the third letter that I've shared with Tony on this channel. And his subject is, "I can smell the fear from Florida." In the long history of Robert bluffing his tough talk to have people on who call him out in public, neither of you can handle dealing with me. I'm assuming I'm blocked or some shit. No, you're not. I've kept my beef with you mostly in private. I'm heavily considering changing that, if for only one thing. I swear I'm after having Robert explain why the fuck he knows new filmmakers are getting turned away in his member chat to later ask, where the fuck are they? He's turning people away he knows are trying to make a film, and that's in private. In public, he asks, where are they? That chicken shit response is something I want addressed to me. He can't practice what he preaches. He's a straight-up bitch. I'm questioning his man card if he can't handle responding. He talks a big lying game about authenticity. He can handle it in private. I already know his offer to have someone on Robservations is bullshit. I can't even pay to have a nice conversation, let alone take him to task in an angry one. I 100% would think Robert is afraid to handle this. I'm not some random person across the internet, you morons. I'm a fucking paid member. If he can't address me, he's not who he presents himself to be. Right now, I'm letting him get away with it because I'm handling this mostly in private conversations. Are any of you authentic, real people? I fucking hate cowards. Sincerely angry, the new filmmaker. Well, Tony, this is the third letter I've read aloud from you on this show. And I would like to point out that I did write you back. I have not heard a response from you, but allow me to share what I wrote back to Tony after getting this, the third of his letters. Tony, I'm a bit perplexed by your acrimonious position regarding both the member call and my position regarding my very valid question of where are all the new filmmakers? Regarding the member call, after learning it was still going on after the power went out, I came back to the call when the power was restored. You were still on the call. I asked you to unmute and come on, but you didn't. Instead, you were talking to people off camera and you made no attempt to unmute and speak to me. I had no idea what you wanted to discuss because you hadn't said anything beforehand, but I was there for at least another hour and you could have jumped in any time. As for new filmmakers, I've been working on motion pictures professionally since 1989, and over the years I've heard a lot of talk from people about making films, what they plan to make and what they hope to bring to the world. This was at a time when everything was still shot on film, so it was far more difficult and expensive to actually make a film back then. I'd say about 90% of these people never went on to make films, unfortunately. These days, we're all carrying around 4K cameras in our pockets with multiple lenses attached. Steven Soderbergh made both Unsane and High-Flying Bird on iPhones. Yet, we're not seeing an explosion in indie cinema, certainly not like we did in the late 80s and 90s. So my query remains, where are all the new filmmakers? It's easier than ever before to make them, with instant worldwide distribution, and yet we're simply not getting many feature films these days. I'm perplexed why you see this as some kind of a slight on you. It's not a put-down, and it certainly was not directed at you personally. I make this observation because we now have technologically advanced equipment so readily available, including cameras, editorial software, and unbelievable VFX technology at everyone's fingertips. There should be an explosion of indie cinema. Hundreds, if not thousands, of feature films being made. But there aren't. Because it's still extremely difficult to make a movie and requires a lot of talent that's incredibly difficult to come by, with teams of people to skillfully execute an idea. That said, I'm still not sure why you're so angry with me and the greater PGS community. I've read and responded to 2 of your letters live on the show, and most recently on Midnight Musings last night. I will be responding to your latest letter on a Sunday or Monday Robservations. This is that letter. But here's the thing. You've acted in an extremely unprofessional manner, and you've been incredibly disrespectful to both myself and the people I choose to work with. I'm at a loss to understand this behavior because no one made a promise to you we haven't kept. I don't even know you. I had no idea you wanted to present any film projects to me. I would have told you the member chats were not the appropriate venue to do so, however. I think I'm more than generous with my time to the many people who want me to come on their podcasts, speak to their high school classes, or any such thing. While your conduct and language certainly has done nothing to deserve it, I extend an invitation to you to appear on an upcoming Robservations. You can ask me anything you want live in front of the world to see. But know this, Tony. I'm going to ask you 2 questions. The first will be, am I to understand you consider yourself a filmmaker? And if you answer in the affirmative, my second question will be, fantastic. So now let's see a film that you've made. I look forward to having you on the show this week, and I look forward to seeing whatever you can show us. Filmmakers make films. They don't talk about films, and they don't harass other people who ask, where are all the filmmakers? Sincerely, best regards, Robert Burnett. So that's what I sent back to Tony. I have yet to hear a response from him. Now, the final letter that I'm going to now put this issue to bed, unless Tony wants to come on the show and take me up on it. This was a rather illuminating letter from Pedro Ferreira, who is a member of the channel. And he wrote me this. Hi, Rob. I've been hearing about Tony Oliver's complaints toward you, and my understanding of the situation is Tony wanted to ask you some questions on a member chat, but due to technical issues and a community lead members chat instead of one-to-one, this frustrated him. So apparently he's been sending letters complaining about not being a recognized filmmaker. I understand his frustration there. This letter isn't meant to take you to task, and it also isn't meant to take Tony to task, but as someone who, like Tony, is also autistic, I would like to offer my opinion on the matter. Not everyone on the spectrum has the same autistic traits. Tony is having what could be called an autistic meltdown. Linked to depression, it comes in waves. Most people, when things don't go according to plan, can just move on. But for autistic individuals, some need things done exactly on time and in a certain way, otherwise they build themselves up for massive emotional disappointment. He's not equipped to deal with his organization being so flexible. There are times when my best laid plans have been undone, even on members chats, and the more emotions you put into that basket, the easier it is to be let down as an autistic person to end up in a very angry mood. It doesn't just last one day, it can last many. On the last members chat, for example, my frustration with the lack of progress in my life, things not sorting themselves out even with intervention, meant I had much more pent-up rage and anger, so it's easier for me to lash out at people or things. In some regard, I feel empathy toward Tony, but his autism doesn't give a free pass to continue sending hate mail. I would say, Rob, in relation to Tony, perhaps try not to be too hard on him. I'm also not saying you said this, Rob, to Tony, although in an earlier letter of mine you did say this to me. But we should try and discourage autistic people from working in the media industry. I don't believe I said that. With the unique ways autistic people look at stuff, I think entertainment needs fresh ideas and a fresh outlook. I'm not trying to patronize you, Rob, just educate a bit. I get you hate having to be forced to avoid offending people, although in the case of something like correct pronouns, that is an ideological one, while autism is a disability. So I think the latter probably needs more prioritization. With the online trolls, I've had my dad suggest that maybe they themselves are autistic with their obsessive behavior, but even if they are, that's not an excuse for stalking, harassment, and generally being an asshole. Likewise, I can't condone Tony's behavior, yet his initial frustration with the way things went is understandable when you look at it from an autism point of view. I think someone just needs to sit him down and talk him through this in a calm manner. A lot of autistic individuals are never given the social interaction skills on how to behave towards others. I never did, and I'm still learning. An easy solution is to send all autistic individuals for emotional training, but unfortunately this isn't an option for many. When someone is hurling insults, there's three possibilities. There are neurotypical idiots who don't want to listen to what you have to say. B, they have Tourette's, or C, there are autistic individuals that need calming down because they're probably having a meltdown. The Post-Geek Singularity attracts all types of weird and wonderful people. The Post-Geek Singularity should have a place for people like me or Tony or you to develop and grow. It's just at times people like Tony can't be or can be goof people. Anyway, I hope this letter doesn't offend you. As Americans say, that's my 2 cents. Kind regards, Pedro. Well, Pedro, I'd say that this is a terrific letter, and it is a credit to you. So I want to appreciate you sending it in. I was unaware of Tony's status as being autistic, but like you said, I don't think anyone's status gives them a free pass to be disrespectful and abusive, especially to somebody who will give them the time of day. I have no idea what people are going to bring to me. And I didn't know that he wanted to present some idea to me. I'm having a member chat that I've been having for years. You know, you can be a member of this channel for $1 a month. And we get 2 days a month where we hang out and I give of my time for hours and make sure I answer everybody's question, everybody who puts their hand up. I don't leave until that's done. So, you know, but I think your point is well taken. I just think that if people are going to keep writing letters over and over again about the same topic, it gets a little much. And everyone has their patience can be tried at certain points. And I think I've done nothing to deserve the abuse that's being heaped on us, nor does anybody I work with, Josh on the Discord server or Mike Bodden. And I consider this matter closed. If Tony wants to come on the show and talk about it, that is fine. So other than that, I'm done with this. And so let's move on. Let's talk about what I want to talk about. First of all, one of the things that I found interesting and being on YouTube, this channel in December, really, Robservations, will be 5 years old. And I've, of course, been on, before that I was on Collider. I started my YouTube journey, believe it or not, in April of 2015. So I'm, 8.5 years in almost here, which is something I never would have even thought about. But since I've always considered being on YouTube kind of like an ongoing convention. It's like being at a panel discussion at a science fiction convention, which I've been going to since I was a kid. So that's kind of what I wanted this channel to be. It was like going to a science fiction convention and having a discussion, sitting in on a panel and listening to people talk and opine about whatever it is you wanted to listen to them talk and opine about, which is why I have other people on this channel other than myself, like King Tannic doing the Otaku Experience, or like RM doing all the shows she does, or like DJ doing Architects of the Imagination. And I think these shows are much better than they get credit for, and they certainly don't get enough views. And maybe having them on my channel, because people expect to see me, maybe be doing them a disservice. But I feel like we've been bringing some great programming to people, and it kind of it falls in line with my mandate of being at a science fiction convention. But when you're on YouTube, you open yourself up to criticism. I open my mouth a lot. And I always have. I got beat up a lot in junior high school by upperclassmen because I was a target. I was loud. And I got physically, I don't even know if you can get in those kinds of fights, but some pretty big fights, physical altercations that were not great. There was, I want to say, at the end of my 7th or 8th grade, I don't remember, there was a certain faction that declared it Bob Burnett Beat Up Day. I told my father I was worried about this, but how could I? It was not something I could even prove. But I told my dad about it. I was worried about it. And on the last day of school, when normally you say goodbye to everybody and hang out, I couldn't get to my locker fast enough. I'd already emptied it out. I grabbed my backpack and I bolted home running as fast as I could. I wasn't going to risk it. And what was really interesting, what I did not know until later, was that my father was waiting at school. And he saw me tear out of school. And he didn't know whether or not he should drive up and stop me and drive me the rest of the way home. But the way he told it to me was that he was incredibly sad to see his son terrified and running home from school. But on the other hand, he appreciated the fact that I handled it in my own way. And he didn't want to get in my way. And so I was able to get out of school, no problem, and I was able to run far enough away that nobody knew where I was, and I had a lovely summer. So, that was, so I've fought my own battles. My favorite funny thing, a guy named Brad Koval he was 2 grades ahead of me. He was a senior, or he was what would you call it? Well, he was a 9th grader. I was a 7th grader. I went to a junior high school. And at some point he wanted to beat me up in the hall for whatever reason. And it was like a confrontation, and he was yelling at me, calling me names, and he stopped, and he's just like, you're just a Star Wars freako. That's what he said. And the entire wing of our junior high school, everybody busted out laughing. People thought they were going to see a fight. And after that, even I laughed. I'm like, that's all you got, buddy? And the thing was, at that time, it wasn't a bad thing to be a Star Wars freako because everyone loved Star Wars. So it was okay. It was all fine and good because I think it was the same year Empire Strikes Back was coming out. So it was probably before Empire came out, but it was soon to come out and everyone was excited about it. So at that point in time, everyone was a Star Wars freako. But anyway, I've talked a lot about on this channel, a lot about Star Trek because that's my jam, or Star Wars. I kind of went off on a Star Wars rant today. And, there's been a lot of people who have called me out most recently about friends of mine who I've streamed with, people I've enjoyed streaming with, such as Az. Az and I did, I thought, a really great 18-episode show about Patrick McGoohan's The Prisoner, where we analyzed each episode of the show. We did an introductory episode, then we analyzed all 17 episodes of the series. Now, Az and I might be of differing political views, but we're friends and we can talk, and I think that we did a pretty great analysis of each episode of The Prisoner. Now, some people have taken me to task because of being friends with someone like Az, because of his viewpoints being different than mine or different than theirs. I'm a friend of Az. I stand by that, and I would encourage everybody to watch our Prisoner stream, especially if you have not seen The Prisoner. I would encourage you to watch. It's only 17 episodes. Watch the show. It was made in the late 60s. It's really interesting, and I invite you to go back and watch the streams that Az and I did. I've also done streams with The Critical Drinker, somebody who I also consider a friend, and I think we've done some great streams. Alien, Star Trek the Motion Picture. He's a novelist himself, and I really enjoy his analysis on stories. Now, there's a lot of people, and of course, Gary Nerdrotic. I've done streams with Gary. We talked to David Goodman about the writer's strike on this channel most recently, and I'm also friends with Gary. I think he's a really nice guy. He's got a beautiful wife who's also very nice. They're the sweetest people in the world, and while you might object to the language he uses, he's not right-wing, and neither is Az, and yet I get accused of this. But I want to say that, which is fine. I think my channel speaks for itself and my position speaks for itself. And if you watch these shows, you'll understand where I'm coming from. But here's the thing. Of all the internet vitriol that's being spewed from every different direction, and I spew it myself, I think that there is a backlash. It's been branded, people want to call it misogyny, or it's a bunch of old white guys bitching about stories and all this. I think what we're all responding to is we are responding to the dishonesty of modern storytelling. Or we're responding to the clumsy nature, the fact that our storytellers that are in charge of some of our favorite franchises are not up to the task of telling stories within those franchises. Because the storytellers of today have become more interested in, well, I think, in sort of a narcissistic way, they believe that they're using our franchises or our favorite IPs as a medium to convey whatever message they think they're conveying to us. And they've straight up said it. Alex Kurtzman has said that about Star Trek, certainly. I wanted to confirm this. I just watched a Collider interview that Damon Lindelof was on talking about Watchmen, and he's talking to Steve. And he explains that that TV writers today liked to out-woke each other. And all of them had to compare and contrast whether or not they have read the work of Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now, he only brought up Ta-Nehisi Coates in this one writer who has written articles on the case for reparations from slavery. And I've read some of Ta-Nehisi Coates' books. I've also read his runs on comic books and things like that, and I find his ideas compelling. I don't necessarily agree with them. But when Damon Lindelof was talking in this interview about where he came up with some of the ideas for what his Watchmen TV series cultivated, and the idea that in Alan Moore's Watchmen, the annihilation of man through nuclear holocaust was really what concerned him. And Damon Lindelof said, now in our modern age, it's racism that was the predilection for the show. And when he brought up a writer, he brought up Ta-Nehisi Coates. But that's the only writer he brought up, which in a way was a little distressing because there are other black writers. My man Frederick Douglass here, one of them. And I would bring up, well, when I was a kid, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man was a big book that everybody had to read. I think everybody in either late elementary school or junior high had to read Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. Ralph Ellison? Ellison. And the problem is I've always conflated him with Harlan Ellison, who's different. But that was another book that we had to read. And, it's strange to me to I think the great stories are self-evident in their truth. And I think that the reason certain stories last throughout time and space is because great literature has human truths in it, because writers are interested in about conveying the experience of what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live on this planet with one another? And in our short time here, what does existence mean? And I think that if an author, a good author, has points that they want to bring up, they will make them inherently work within this. If you're going to write fiction, you make them inherently work within that fiction, and you allow an audience. A great writer allows an audience. This is an obvious thing to say because we've been saying it for the last couple of years, and I've said it on this channel. A great writer presents an audience a lot of things to think about, but a great writer never tells an audience what they should be thinking. And I feel that that's not so true today. And I think nowadays writers seem to be possessed, not all, but many writers, especially those who are writing certain television shows, are possessed with this notion that they're doing the Lord's work by we're going to go right all the wrongs of the past through our programming, and we're going to make sure. And what's interesting is I've always said that you can't trade one oppression for another. You can't have revenge oppression and have it work out. You know, there's one race of human beings on this planet. That's it. We might have different ethnicities, but there's one race of people here. And I believe that our job as human beings, sentient, self-aware human beings, is to get our act together and travel to the stars, because there is an infinite universe out there that is waiting for us to figure out what its meaning is. And, well, we're not doing such a good job when we can't keep our house in order. Well, one of the things that I've loved in my own personal life, as everyone knows, is I've loved Star Trek. And I thought, for the most part, Star Trek has done a pretty good job of giving me a lot of things to think about. More so than anything, Star Trek instilled in me an idea that the universe is a wondrous place, that the world we live in is amazing. You walk out your front door, and you'll never know what adventure you're going to find. To boldly go does not mean to be wishing you were journeying on the bridge of the Enterprise, although, you know, there's a bit of that with your friends Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. But no, to boldly go in our own lives is to go out in the world, have adventures, challenge yourself, go places and do things you haven't done. Just like in Star Wars, the Force is not meant to be something that is unknowable. It's not some fantasy idea, but it comes from things like the code, the Bushido Code. You know, the idea that the Jedi were somewhat, they're samurai. They followed a code, just like the Marine Corps has a code. You know, that's what, it's metaphoric. Luke Skywalker was all of us. We all could tap into the proverbial Force. We can all improve ourselves, make ourselves better. You know, find our Quan, as Jerry Maguire, one of Jerry Maguire's, Cuba Gooding Jr., one of Jerry Maguire's, his only client at one point, would tell you, the Quan. You know, that's what the Force was, and that's why Star Wars worked, because all of us were Luke Skywalker, and we all knew a guy like Han Solo, or a girl like Han Solo, or a plucky heroine like Princess Leia, who is a girl boss, a badass, and given a choice, she can save herself. You just put a stormtrooper blaster in her hands, and she'll sort things out real quick. But anyway, a friend of mine, Dan sent me a letter today. Well, actually, an article. And it was funny, and I hadn't seen it. And Dan Coyle is a man that I've known for years and years and years. And he sent me this article, and it was in Quillette, the magazine Quillette, and it was published the other day. And what's funny is some people say, oh, Rob, Quillette's a conservative rag. Yes, it is. But I read all kinds of different things, and Quillette has some interesting articles, just like Medium has interesting articles, just like every periodical has interesting articles. I zip around the internet looking for articles, as you all know. And I found this article because of Dan. Dan Coyle sent me this, so shout out to Dan. For me, I missed this one, and this article you might as well call this article RMB catnip. Because that's what it is. Meow. So let's get into this. This is a long one, and I'm going to opine as I go through it. Now, as I will stop, and if you want to send super chats or tips, you can. The link is there. You can, and I will stop periodically through this article and find out what you guys have to say, because this one is a banger, and it's not unlike many things I've been saying for a long time on this show. This article is written by Johnny Schmidt, and it was published on September 21st on Quillette.com. Strange new sci-fi. If truth is the first casualty of war, then perhaps good fiction is the first tragedy of the culture war. Classic Star Trek is not Shakespeare. It has always been the sort of show in which aliens could steal Spock's brain, or Dr. Crusher could fall in love with a Scottish space ghost. It's sometimes screwed up. Sometimes the plot dragged, the ending didn't make sense, or the wacky science went too far and broke its own rules. But still, it was always primarily about trying to tell a good story. Strange New Worlds is different. There's less emphasis on story, more on being the right kind of show. Most of the screen time is devoted to fan service and contrived personal issues. What little remains for plot is rushed and simplistic, almost an afterthought, with shallow concepts and tacked-on progressive themes. The crew are less like individuals than demographic avatars. Non-toxic male leader, trauma survivor, whose most profound quality is being really, really excited to be on Star Trek. Couldn't have said it better myself. Everyone who sits in the captain's chair has to have their catchphrase to make the ship go. This is openly discussed. You gonna say it, your thing? Asks Lieutenant Ortegas, the first time Spock takes command. I'm workshopping Vamoose, but it's supposed to be about you. I'm glad he brought this up, because obviously James T. Kirk didn't have that. It wasn't until Captain Picard said, engage, and somehow this became now a thing. You know, Michael Burnham to fly, or let's fly, or fly somewhere, whatever. Like somebody decided that it was going to be a catchphrase. This is a weird thing about modern Star Trek. Why is this a thing in the first place? But it is. Now, I would complain that when Spock should have come up with a catchphrase, knowing who he works with and knowing that it was more important to them than it was to him, Spock would have figured something out that was probably the most badass catchphrase ever. Because that's what Spock does. And his catchphrase, if I'd written the show, would have been so cool that everybody would have sat back in silent respect and let him say it. And the ship would have gone to warp. That's if I wrote Star Trek. But sadly, I didn't. It's supposed to be about you could be Strange New Worlds' tagline. The actors seem to think their job is to model our reactions for us. In the series premiere, which is supposed to be about first contact, there's a 4-minute-long marriage proposal, relevant to nothing before or after, in which Spock and his bride-to-be talk as if they just discovered they were Vulcan 5 minutes ago. Spock. Query. T'Pring. Response. Spock. Vulcans are so formal. T'Pring. Aren't we, though? Helpfully, being Vulcan now means saying the subtext out loud. Spock. Matrimony and duty. The two will complement each other. T'Pring. I remain skeptical. They're supposed to be part of a 2,000-year-old alien culture, but they sound more like Comic-Con kids playing house. The episode is so stuffed with this sort of communal navel-gazing that we never get around to learning anything about the actual first contact, what the aliens believe, what they're fighting about, even what they're called, except, of course, that their political divisions are an allegory for ours. When there's actual science in this fiction, things get even worse. The biggest offender in this regard is the episode The Elysian Kingdom, in which a sentient nebula traps the crew inside of a fairy tale. The premise is that Dr. Mbenga has a terminally ill daughter, whom he's secretly keeping alive in a transporter buffer while he researches a cure. One day, he uncasks her for a bedtime story, which attracts the attention of the Nebula, which senses her loneliness. To cheer her up, it transforms the Enterprise into a magical kingdom and the crew into bombastic Ren Fair enthusiasts. Only Dr. Mbenga and the chief engineer are unaffected, and they eventually learn to communicate with the Nebula. They try the obvious thing once, and it just works. It turns out to be a benevolent super being called Deborah, and the girl goes off to live with it so that she can avoid death and spend eternity having made-up adventures. I could talk about how that's an amalgamation of a number of Star Trek episodes, but I won't. If this plot seems a bit thin, that's because it is. Instead of building the show around traditional beats, gradually revealed information, the writers seem to think we're dying to find out what kind of fantasy character each cast member has become, which they slow reveal one by one like grand prizes on a game show. There's a witchy princess, a cowardly courtesan, a swashbuckling knight, etc. The writers spend far more time developing these made-up persona than they do on the situation itself. This is a shame, because there's a lot they could have explored. The Nebula's existence is hand-waved away as probably a Boltzmann brain, which the characters sum up inaccurately, as the idea that a mind can form spontaneously in space. But Boltzmann's idea was far weirder than that. A Boltzmann brain is a human brain that forms spontaneously, complete with memories and a sense of self, but only after the end of the universe, and only because infinite emptiness provides an infinite amount of time in which to roll the dice. Unlike the sentient Nebula, it doesn't perform any tricks. It just freezes alone in the vacuum after a moment or two of simulated life. Obviously, the writers aren't required to get the science perfect. It's Star Trek, after all. But questioning the premise would have opened up new possibilities. If, for example, the ship's engineer had pointed out that the Nebula couldn't be a Boltzmann brain, the logical conclusion would be that it must have evolved. And if it evolved, it has needs and goals, any of which could provide a basis for communication. Trying to fathom the mind of something that alien, at least well enough to talk it out of turning the ship into a live-action Disney movie, might have made for a much richer plot with more interesting ideas. Look at how much mileage Stanislaw Lem got out of his idea, or this idea, in his novel, Solaris. But, yes, it was turned into 2 movies, one by Andrei Tarkovsky and the other by Steven Soderbergh, and Jim Cameron, and my friend Chuck Bender. But the world of Strange New Worlds is designed for instant gratification. It can't encompass the possibility that the Nebula might be too hostile or weird to be trusted, or that living in it might be a subjective hell, any more than it could acknowledge the actual danger the crew is in, even though within the fantasy they're divided into factions of mortal enemies and armed with swords. The self-referential silliness of the episode precludes taking any of this seriously. The startling premise doesn't bear scrutiny either. If you could simply keep mortally ill people alive in the transporter buffer, then everyone would be doing it. In that case, surely Mbenga's daughter wouldn't be on the ship, she'd be warehoused in a Federation hospital, and if smuggling her on board would have been selfish and irresponsible. If, on the other hand, it is illegal to keep people alive in pattern buffers, then there should be a good reason for that. In such a world, the act of extending life in this way would be cruel. Her pattern would be deteriorating, and her father would have to ignore the mounting evidence of cognitive damage. This would have confronted Mbenga with a grim but poignant choice, especially if in the end the Doctor were forced to realize that Deborah could only offer illusions, and that it was finally time to let go. Now, on this point, I would like to say the idea of putting yourself in a pattern buffer was really first canonically offered in the 6th season Next Generation episode Relics, when Scotty did this when his ship, the Jenolan, crashed on a Dyson sphere, and he was in that pattern buffer for 75 years. Now, this is an interesting thing. this show, Strange New Worlds, is supposed to be canonical. But the idea of holding people in pattern buffers is actually a quite good one. And if you want to go back even further, we did see examples of that in the third season TOS episode, The Day of the Dove, or Day of the Dove. When the Klingons are beaming up to the Enterprise, they hold the Klingons in the pattern buffer for a moment while our crew can get off the transporter and they can get enough security in there where they can make sure that the Klingons are taken, apprehended so they don't run amok, which doesn't last very long. But the idea of the transporter as a way to store people, or it's a way to be immortal. What if you only wanted to come out of the transporter every decade or so and you wanted to live thousands of years? That's definitely something as well. Now, a smart writer would go in that direction, but they never did. They took an idea from the original series and from Next Generation, and they sort of co-opted it and used it, admittedly, in an interesting way. You know, putting terminal patients into the pattern buffer and storing them, even if you let them out once a day, they would not know about the passage of time. And this is a really compelling idea that they really didn't do much with, like on most of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Of course, fiction has always required that we suspend our disbelief. All shows have their little inconsistencies, what they used to call fridge logic, because it doesn't hit you until you get up for a snack. Star Trek has always required faith in impossible things like faster-than-light travel, humanoid aliens, force fields, a future without scarcity, a democratic society without elections, etc. They're conventions of the genre. But these writers go further than that. They ask that we suspend not just our disbelief, but our desire for a believable narrative. Amen. At the start of the episode, after the Doctor finishes reading to his daughter, she complains about the ending, and he tells her that's just how the story goes. But when she protests, he gives in and says that one day she'll be able to write her own endings, which of course she does when she leaves to join the Nebula. She even comes back briefly, all grown up, having experienced years in a single moment, to let us know that she did exactly that. The message is clear. Since anything can happen in a story, we should feel free to choose the outcomes that we prefer. Past Star Trek writers would never have considered this. Sometimes they explored the idea that thought and reality might be interchangeable, but this was treated as a threat, not as a license to phone in the script. When daydreams come to life in the Next Generation, the first season, Next Generation episode, Where No One Has Gone Before, written by Diane Duane, based on her novel The Wounded Sky, kind of, which you know what, if you want to read a great original series Star Trek novel, Diane Duane's The Wounded Sky will do you well. In the Next Generation episode Where No One Has Gone Before, it nearly destroys the Enterprise. In Remember Me, a similar force traps Dr. Crusher in a bottle universe in which everyone she loves keeps disappearing. The writers took it for granted that the limits of a story should reflect those of reality, and that those limits were trespassed at one's peril. I was talking today and yesterday about Star Trek, but also about Star Wars and Ahsoka. And I was mentioning the fact that in Star Wars, look, when I say that you have to go to the original Star Wars, now we all know it as Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, but it was not that way when I first saw it. But you go back to the original Star Wars, that is Star Wars. Everything else is just a derivation on a theme. And Star Wars, while it had the Jedi and the mentions of the Force and all of that, it was still ultimately about heroes fighting and joining a rebellion against a galactic empire. And the overt messaging about George Lucas's Star Wars for his 6 Star Wars movies was really about what can cause the death of a democracy, a death of a republic, and turn it into empire. George Lucas was not as concerned with the Force and the Jedi Knights, except as examples of what kind of a government or a theocracy might be happening here. Now, I would say that modern Star Trek and modern Star Wars are similar in that they've spun off into Fantasyland. Writers that have spent more time with fantasy stories than they have with, say, hard science fiction stories are writing all of this. The last episode of Ahsoka, I'm like, what does any of this have to do with a rebellion against an empire? I get it. I love the Jedi. I love Force Witches. I love all that stuff. But ultimately, that's not what George Lucas's saga was really concerned about. I mean, it was really concerned about on the larger level, how does democracy die? And on a smaller level, the redemption of a father and his relationship with his son. The Force and the Jedi and all that are peripheral to the story that George Lucas is trying to tell. It's a personal story about finding it within yourself, the strength that you need to go face up to what your legacy really is. Luke needed to become a Jedi because, hey, that's cool and interesting when you're watching a movie. But the whole point of him and all of the teachings that Yoda was trying to impart to him was because they all knew the day would come when he would face his father, which is true of all of us in some way. And that's why Star Wars resonated. That's why fairy tales resonate, because they are ultimately about their audience. And their audience has to have something to connect to. Nowadays, Star Wars, just like Star Trek, has spun off into Fantasyland because I'm not convinced that the people that are writing Star Wars know how, or Star Trek, know how to make it allegorical and bring it back down, or metaphoric, down to us. What does it mean to its audience? I get it. People like it as entertainment. But you know what? When you watch the great TV shows, whether it's The Sopranos or whether it's Breaking Bad or whether it's Only Murders in the Building or whether it's The Bear or whether it's Ted Lasso, all the great TV shows that we're all loving now do a very good job of examining the human condition. The best science fiction always did. Star Trek certainly did. It doesn't anymore. So here we go. The writers took it for granted that the limits of a story should reflect those of reality, and that those limits were trespassed at one's peril. What could have changed in the intervening decades? What cultural or political revolution might have rendered audiences more receptive to the idea that we should not feel bound by traditional rules, that those rules might be oppressive? It's not difficult to see the ideology at work. Art influences society, so it should reflect the world we want to see. To reach that world, we must raise the status of women and minorities and lower that of white men. Traditional norms and rules were socially constructed to prevent this, and that should change. Now, by me saying this, suddenly a lot of you are going to tune out from this, but it's happened whether you want to admit it or not. For whatever reason, is it better or worse? I don't know. I've talked about it on Star Trek before. In the second season of Star Trek Discovery, they introduce one of Pike's crew, a man, a white guy, who immediately, when he's introduced, is a dick. He's introduced to be a dick. Why is he introduced that way? Because they're going to make him an asshole from the very beginning, so they can kill him later in the episode. And the fact that he's a white guy and he's an asshole, that's just simple and easy and uncreative. But the fact is, it did happen. And in another Short Takes, there's an episode where there's a female captain that really stands by and allows her roly-poly male subordinate to be killed. And the way they set it up, he deserves to die, which is the most anti-Star Trek thing I've ever seen. But we've seen this over and over again in modern Star Trek. Strange New Worlds and Discovery are wildly guilty of this. Anyway, this would explain why Strange New Worlds plays fast and loose with cause and effect, even when it's trying to be gritty. In Memento Mori, Laan Noonien Singh, the trauma survivor, uses her child experience as a Gorn captive to decode their battlefield messages. Her brother learned their light-based language, which the Gorn also happened to use for ship-to-ship communication, despite the fact that this would be the equivalent of humans running a string from bridge to bridge with a tin can on each end. Encryption predates warp drive by about 2,000 years. But it's critical that her experience give her unrealistic insight and toughness, even if that means that others must be portrayed as unrealistically obtuse. In the series premiere, she's presented as the only one capable of comprehending the fact that unresponsive aliens might pose a threat. In The Broken Circle, she drinks a Klingon twice her size under the table without showing even a hint of intoxication. Children of the Comet is similarly hobbled by the need to aggrandize its main character. It opens with a teenage Uhura discovering that she's been pranked into wearing a formal dress to a casual team dinner, where she awkwardly blurts out to the captain that she's not even sure she wants to be in Starfleet. This is supposed to set up the need for her to redeem herself on the subsequent mission. However, the writers can't let the prank just stand, let her squirm a little, spend the party mortified, watching her gaffe play out in the facial expressions of the adults. Instead, everyone smiles and gushes and praises and reassures. The prankster explains away the prank. The dinner is padded with a long, detailed, emotional rendition of her life story, to which everyone pays rapt and generous attention. As a result, the plot of the episode doesn't even get started until minute 10. This focus on celebrating Uhura distorts the entire episode and robs it of dramatic tension. The crew encounters a comet that is actually another ancient space god and finds on its surface a giant glowing acorn covered in symbols, bumps, that turn out to be a musical language, which Uhura immediately decodes with zero buildup, interaction, or explanation beyond a breezy grade school summary of the basics of music theory. All the screen time goes into encouraging and reassuring her, bantering about Spock's inability to give a pep talk and praising her genius when she succeeds. It's possible that this is progress. There's no objectively correct way to tell a story, and the episode was favorably reviewed. Perhaps the writers see a trade-off between setting up tension, which would require a little cruelty toward the character, and modeling the right behavior for the audience? Or maybe because Uhura is black, treating her more harshly would risk inflicting discomfort on vulnerable viewers just to entertain the majority. Maybe it's better for young people to see themselves reflected as always complete, already brilliant, interesting in and of themselves. But if shows really do shape our values, might not they also shape our reasoning skills? What lesson would a young person learn from don't sweat the details, just go with the flow? And Uhura isn't the only person being tested on that comet. Sam Kirk, the only white male human character other than the captain, is presented very differently. He is lazy and disengaged during the briefing. He jokes around on the mission, ignoring obvious danger. His quips are the only quips treated with disdain. He injures himself by touching the glowing acorn, a decision as implausibly dumb as Uhura's solutions are implausibly brilliant, and spends the rest of the episode probably dying, a fact treated as so insignificant that we don't even follow up on whether he survives. He does return briefly in All Those Who Wander to demonstrate that he's also an implausible coward. In fact, all the women in the show are suspiciously perfect, either stoic like La'an or unflappable wisecrackers like Ortegas. They talk down to the men. They dish gossip behind their backs, peek at them while they're changing, beat them in fights, and even hit on them openly in front of their co-workers. The black men are more subdued, but still paragons of competence. By contrast, the white men, when not literally dying of stupidity, are remedial cases at best. Co-creator Akiva Goldsman intended to correct the problematic behavior of past captains, and it shows. His Pike doesn't lead so much as cheerlead, playing the nurturing dad, cooking meals for his higher-ranking girlfriend, telling her how little he deserves her. Ethan Peck's Spock is far from the self-possessed wag of the original series, comfortable without emotions and bemused by the crew. Instead, he's a bumbling, autistic fixer-upper who just needs the right woman to help unlock his feelings. When he's accidentally turned human in charades, it's not his male peers who coach him through it, but his human mother, while his love interest, Nurse Chapel, cures him by diving into a wormhole to confess her crush to female transdimensional super beings, which also gives her the confidence to tell off an implausibly condescending male colleague. Now, here's the thing. These observations are not coming from me or coming from the writer who, is a white dude. They're just observations about the truth in what's shown in this show. And my problem with all of this is all of these things that he's talking about get in the way of telling really interesting and compelling science fiction, action adventure, allegorical tales. Half of Strange New Worlds seems to be about setting some kind of a new precedent, so we're paying back all the... Remember, this show did have a military structure, and for those of you who want to yell about, that's Gene Roddenberry didn't mean for it to be military, well, there's a reason why there's captains and first officers and lieutenants and ensigns. So yes, it does follow a military structure because the people who worked on it in 1966 and before and after, a lot of them served in the military, served in World War II. Perhaps this is all just a healthy bit of table turning. Female fans are owed a few mea culpas for Mudd's women at least. But this is supposed to be a utopian future. Humanity at its best. Presumably, we'll grow past the need for corrective reverse discrimination in the next 200 years. It's telling that Anson Mount, who plays the captain, has called this a universe where ethics, maybe not the I can't pronounce this word. I can't pronounce this word. Obsessience? I can't pronounce it. To ethics. But a sense of ethics is kind of universal. This would require consistency and fairness. A sense of ethics is whatever you want it to be. Obsessian. I can't pronounce this word. I know what it means, but I can't pronounce it. This flexible approach to values becomes even more problematic when the show takes on serious themes. So I'm going to stop there because I'm tongue twisted. Let me take a breath. Let me take a breath and go and see what you guys are saying here. So, Scott Bartholomew says, tell Tony to shut up until he can successfully make a Trek feature that is faithful to canon. Well, maybe even a small independent film. No, I didn't know if he is indeed autistic, as Pedro said. I don't know that. All I can do is respond to people. But, I was a little bit perplexed because this whole thing was touched off by something I didn't even know about. So, what can I say? Scott Bartholomew goes on to say, today's OSIRIS-REx return mission reminds me of Project Wildfire. What Scott Bartholomew is referring to is we're bringing back a probe that has soil from an asteroid for the very first time. So when you talk about Project Wildfire, what Scott is referring to is the Andromeda strain that was directed by Robert Wise, who directed Sound of Music, Star Trek the Motion Picture, and it was written by Michael Crichton. I think it was his first novel. Yes, the Michael Crichton of Jurassic Park fame, and he created ER. So Scott, watch the skies. We'll see if there's going to be any craziness that happens. But nice pull on Project Wildfire. Scott Bartholomew says, hoping for better Trek quality post-strike. Let's hope so. Life is Good says, if someone tells you to dump friends and acquaintances because of politics, it's they who are not your friend. I agree. Another thing, old white guys bitching about anything are just as valid as anyone else. Not anymore. And I think that's the point. And I think that's kind of odd. But, here's my thing. Hey, I don't care who you are. I don't care what color, creed, shape, size, what your sexuality is, how you identify. I'm for all of that, It's just that, what are you going to offer for the rest of us? Like what's my whole thing is, how are we making the world a better place? I would hope that through some of these chats, maybe through the work that I've done, movies I've been involved in, whether it's TV shows, the Crisis Medicine Tactical Casualty Care series I've been directing since 2017, of which I'm going to do more on October 17th up in Portland. I think that's some of the most important work I've done, helping people survive active violent events before hospital care is available, how to provide pre-hospital care for people that are injured in active violent events before EMTs show up. I think that's important. RRTNZ says, Dear Bob, old news. New Trek sucks. Ahsoka is dull. And you're still the king. Well, I don't know about that. Now for new news, Wales beat Australia today in the Rugby World Cup by a record score, 40-6. Samaruam Birth? Or is it Bith? Wow, I don't know that. I don't know is that Maori? I don't know my Maori to that extent. Kia ora, mate. That's crazy. That score's not great. Hitchcock is the GOAT. Sends in a tip and says, now that the great Michael Caine is retiring from acting, I wonder if Kenneth Branagh will take over the mantle of Christopher Nolan's good luck charm. He's been in Nolan's last 3 films. Perhaps. I mean, Michael Caine's like 90. He's had such a great career. I think it's amazing. But life is good. Thank you for that $20 super chat. And it's weird. Like, I don't understand. I find it bizarre. Like, now, look, maybe it's because I, grew up in an era where people could get in fistfights and not worry about guns or knives or anything like that. But I've never felt that people who had different viewpoints than I did were necessarily bad or worthy of scorn or disdain. I've never understood that. And I think, look, my problem with what we're getting, on one hand, we're getting amazing television. We're getting some really amazing stuff. And, both Barbie and Oppenheimer, what should be celebrated about both of those films, and yes, this is true of Barbie, is that Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig, when they wrote that script, and should I say Greta Gerwig or Noah Baumbach? I didn't mean to say Noah Baumbach first. I mean, I don't want people to jump all over me. Greta Gerwig directed the hell out of that movie. Is they did something fairly subversive and meaningful for a movie based on the Barbie brand. That's what I think has been forgotten. And, and there's other people that are doing, look at Taylor Swift. Look into what she's been doing with all the cities that she's been playing in. It's pretty amazing stuff what Taylor Swift has been doing. So there's a lot of people out there doing really great work, I would say. And, the fact that Oppenheimer is going to make almost $1 billion and Barbie is making as much money as it's making, these are films that are worthy of the success, and they have something to say. There's something going on in their DNA, which, is worthy of celebration. We're in that time too. And there's a lot of great TV that we're getting. Anyway, I'm going to go on to this. This flexible approach to values becomes even more problematic when the show takes on serious themes. In Ad Astra per Aspera, in Season 2, First Officer Una Chin Riley is on trial for hiding the fact that she's a member of a genetically modified human offshoot called Illyrians. Yeah, and by the way, all of this comes from Dorothy Fontana's novel, Vulcan's Glory, which gets no credit at all. What follows is a classic tribunal episode comparable to the Next Generation's famous Measure of a Man, in which Picard defends Data's right to refuse to submit to a dangerous experiment. However, where that episode was classically liberal, treating the rule of law as legitimate, universal, and perfectible, this episode could be a primer in critical race theory. The law is simply wrong, a byproduct of a cartoonish, old-fashioned prejudice expressed in playground taunts and slurs scrawled on neighbors' houses. Starfleet is no longer an exemplar whose only controversies are big questions with no easy answers. It's a flawed institution with systemic prejudice against Mahdi's, and it's past time for a reckoning. This, too, is meant to be about us. In Ghosts of Illyria, when Una's background is first introduced, she laments to her private log that the captain only chose to harbor her because she saved the crew from an alien light disease. When will it be just enough to be an Illyrian, she asks, a line that is jarring in context. It's not a race, but evokes a familiar progressive catechism about the official minority lived experience. In the case the message wasn't clear enough, the show even introduces a black female Illyrian civil rights lawyer called Nira, who talks in breathless contemporary progressive cliches. "Congratulations, you've discovered empathy," she snaps at the captain when he dares to suggest that he understands where she's coming from. Shortly after unapologetically calling him stupid, she even seems to reference the trans debate by mentioning people who in the past weren't allowed to look like what they really are. In Measure of a Man, the resolution depends on making the best argument. If Data was designed by a man, why isn't he property? Answering that requires Picard to make a threefold leap. 1. The relevant question is not whether Data is a machine, but whether he's sentient. Because 2, if he's sentient and yet property, then he and all future androids are slaves. And finally, no human has any quality that Data lacks, which they could use to demonstrate their own sentience. The last one has no effective rejoinder. In the absence of a consciousness test, there's no rule that could classify Data as property that would not apply to all life. Notice that this requires that Picard convince not just the tribunal, but the audience of the show. If his argument had not been sound, the episode would not have worked. In Ad Astra per Aspera, however, the resolution depends on delegitimizing the legal process. Nira opens with a speech about all the laws that have been wrong in the past. Tellingly, no one reins her in, despite the fact that she's grandstanding here rather than focusing on the case at hand. Worse still, the prosecutor barely bothers to defend the specific law in question. She says that it's not worth getting into the reasons why genetic engineering is wrong, but it's basically playing God and has led to bad stuff in the past, and that it's important to follow even bad laws. When the Admiral takes the stand, Nira grills him about all the times he's failed to follow the Prime Directive, even though we established back in Children of the Comet that under certain circumstances, this is perfectly legal. Then they question Una about the prejudice she's witnessed, and she relates a story about her family having been too afraid to take her to the doctor, as a result of which she almost died. There's a brief cliffhanger when it comes out that the captain was illegally harboring her, despite knowing about her Illyrian identity, but then Nira points out that since Una was afraid for her life once, 20 years ago, she was technically asking for asylum, which Starfleet has to grant, even when it's to protect people from its own laws, apparently. Besides, she insinuates, this is now the only way to protect Pike from being prosecuted as an accessory. So obviously, we should bend the law to enable that. So they decide that Una is not guilty and can retain her position, and everyone seems happy about this, apart from one old white Vulcan guy who dissents. Leaving aside the ethics of abusing the refugee process, this outcome is forced. Measure of a Man recognized its responsibility to convince us, but Ad Astra per Aspera succeeds only by avoiding obvious arguments in defense of the law. To give just one, performance-enhancing modifications put pressure on others to adapt, risking a genetic arms race that can lead to unpredictable alterations of human character, such as the destruction of empathy and restraint, which is arguably precisely what led to the eugenics wars. This would have opened lines of attack to which it's hard to imagine a response. Commander Chinriley, how many applicants did you beat out for your spot at the Academy? Would you still have made it if they'd also had illegal modifications? How exemplary would your record have been without them? Is it fair to force others to take on risk to compete? My learned friend Nira, do Illyrians allow all forms of genetic modification? Aren't some still outlawed? So you recognize a society's right to regulate. How do you know your regulations are objectively the correct ones? What's the punishment for violating them? Doesn't this imply that you're prejudiced against slightly more modified people? The absence of any explanation other than the systemic racism makes the episode feel incomplete and emotionally manipulative. It is the thematic equivalent of a fixed fight. If you already know the right answer to a question, counter-arguments aren't threads to be followed, but threats to be avoided. All logic becomes fridge logic. I would also say this in regards to The Measure of a Man, which is one of the finest, in my mind, episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. What's really interesting is that Picard doesn't necessarily know if he can win this argument. Obviously, Data's become his friend, and they really up the stakes. And they have Riker give you really compelling arguments about why Data might indeed be property. Because Riker has to do his best at proving his own point. And in that episode, he does, most dramatically, when he turns, when the strings are cut, Pinocchio, he carries on his analogy from the very first episode of TNG Encounter at Farpoint, when he turns Data off. So there's for an audience, there's a real conundrum. You're really worried about Data's fate. Well, when you're watching this episode, you know where it's going to go. You know that Una Chin Riley's going to get off, not necessarily by great logic or a great case, but because what we're watching is we're watching all the injustice in our world being relitigated and fixed in one episode of Star Trek. And to me, that's disingenuous storytelling. It's not good storytelling. It's just the writers saying, well, we're going to show you people, meaning we, the audience, what's right and what's wrong, and what should really happen. But it doesn't take into consideration how the law really works. Whereas Measure of a Man, while yes, it also stretches credulity in terms of a legal case, it still does a very good job of presenting both sides of the argument. And you, the audience, are, as you're watching the episode, you're conflicted because it's really well written. It was written by the way, Melinda Snodgrass, who also wrote a great Star Trek novel called The Tears of the Singers. And she's a great writer, fantastic writer. And I think if you put those two episodes up against one another, you can graphically illustrate the difference between modern Star Trek and call it classic Star Trek. It's a short leap from tell your own story to make your own rules. In fact, the closer you look, the more make your own rules seems like the theme to Strange New Worlds. In the Season 2 opener, they steal the ship to rescue a crewmate who's been doing unsanctioned freelance espionage behind enemy lines, all with zero consequences. The Admiral treats it like a harmless lark and lets them off with a warning. In Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, an immortal alien's hoard of stolen antiquities is presented as an adorable quirk. In the series premiere First Contact, making your own rules is the core theme. It even contains the line, "Screw General Order 1, their term for the Prime Directive, Starfleet's principle of non-interference and its most sacred law. What good is a rule if you're not going to break it?" asks the captain, before using the Enterprise to threaten a less developed species into putting aside their differences. What differences? We never learn, because the writers never bothered to explore them. They could have a truly unresolvable conflict. One faction could be uncompromising space Nazis, or they could merely be so unintelligible as to render allegory impossible. But the allegory is the point, so details must be avoided. Every plot hole and forced revelation must be in the service of inspiring the captain to give a speech likening their problems to ours, a speech that seems less designed to convince the aliens than it is to lecture the viewers of the series. The United States is treated as a distant, regrettable memory, whose civil war over competing ideas of liberty dragged the world into chaos. There's even an audit the vote sign in the historic montage, in case it's not clear that the problem is the intransience of the American right. The solution is provided indirectly, again via the special wisdom imparted by La'an Noonien Singh's trauma. She tells the captain, it's not thinking you're going to die that gets people killed, which causes him to realize that survival depends on cooperation. This is not a terrible message, if a bit sophomoric. However, coupled with the shotgun diplomacy and willful ignorance of the details of the quarrel, it takes on an authoritarian veneer. The stakes are too high to wait on progress, it seems to say. We need to force the others to comply. The writers anticipate possible objections to this high-handed approach by sampling a couple of lines from Clatou's speech in The Day the Earth Stood Still. Now, this does not mean giving up any freedom except the freedom to act irresponsibly. We have an organization for the mutual protection of all planets and for the complete elimination of aggression. This is a noble aspiration as long as those pursuing it aren't making up the rules as they go along. If truth is the first casualty of war, then perhaps good fiction is the first tragedy of culture war. With Strange New Worlds, Paramount promised a return to classic Trek, but has delivered something else entirely: postmodern, post-liberal, post-prime directive, a progressive wolf in retro captain's gold. Perhaps it's a sign of the changing times. The reviews are good, even if the audience scores are middling. But if the ratings start to resemble those of Discovery, tellingly those are kept secret, then the creators might benefit from questioning the occasional creative choice, or even allowing a little more intellectual and political diversity back into the writer's room. That is, if they're interested in telling a science fiction story that does anything other than explore the already known. Now, I have to say, I read this article and I'm like, man, I felt this kind of nailed it. And I know there is, as some might call it, a right-wing slant to this article. And I can understand why. But there is I think, along with a lot of other things, and I've been saying it for a long time about modern Star Trek, Star Trek 09, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, I don't think, it was just dumb. It was a dumb action romp. But what I feel more so about Strange New Worlds than anything else, I think that Strange New Worlds and, of course, Discovery before it are efforts on the part of the writers where whatever thing they're trying to tell their audience, you're wrong. The way you've led your life is wrong. This way, our way, what we're telling you is the right way. They are truly telling us how to live, why we should live this way, and they are disregarding, I think, the great rule of any story, which is what you want to do is you want to give an audience something to think about, not tell an audience what to think. And I've said this many times on this show, but I like this article because it did a good job of pointing out the things that I find really difficult to swallow when it comes to this show. And I'll tell you something else. As an aside, I haven't mentioned this on the show, but there is a short take. These inexplicably awful animated episode, these little bite-sized chunks that are supposed to celebrate Star Trek the Animated Series, which in 22 episodes won an Emmy Award. It also, I believe, won a Peabody Award, maybe. The animated series from 50 years ago had a lot of great Star Trek episodes that were written by many of the writers that wrote for the original Star Trek. This past episode, I kid you not, the Enterprise D, under the command of Picard, they discover that there is a new alien civilization that has achieved warp technology. Riker and Dr. Crusher, voiced by Gates McFadden and Jonathan Frakes, beam down to this planet to instigate first contact with a new warp-capable civilization. This civilization, as depicted in this animated show, is prone, I'm not kidding, is prone to pick their nose and wipe their boogers all over everything. And we see Dr. Crusher and Number One looking around and seeing there's boogers everywhere. It doesn't make sense that a spacefaring scientific race would be doing something like that because it's relatively unsanitary, and the way they make it look is, quite frankly, disgusting. And then, delighted to make the acquaintance of the Enterprise crew and to know that there's other life forms in the universe, they bring out a special dish to serve them, rotting fish that's been microwaved, old fish that's been microwaved that smells terrible. And of course, our crew is disgusted, and they turn around and blow up the warp engine so they can get the hell out of there because they're so disgusted by this alien race's the way they live. I was appalled by this, not because of the picking your nose and wiping your boogers everywhere. But because if you look at the fact, I thought that as an episode about about we are meeting people whose customs might be abhorrent to us, that we would find in a very Star Trek way some middle ground where we could instead find some way, despite our cultural differences, to have a meeting of the minds and figure out a way to move forward together. Not in modern Star Trek. They play it for... I know it's only a 3-minute animated episode, but at the end of the episode, Riker and Crusher blow up this alien race's warp drive and could leave the planet because they're too disgusted at the customs of this alien race. What the hell is this? Are we supposed to laugh at this? Literally, I mean, the puerile humor and the booger jokes and all that. But the episode, I really objected to the final, what it was saying. That there are cultures that are just too disgusting to deal with. Let's just blow up their shit, blow up their technology, blow up what is presumably the greatest technological achievement, and get the hell out of there so we don't have to deal with these disgusting people anymore. I was watching it, I'm going, wow. This is one of the most abhorrent things I've ever seen, amongst many abhorrent things in terms of what they've done with the Star Trek franchise. And I understand, well, Rob, it's just a humorous 3-minute episode. Yeah, but you know what? It's not. We're 57 years into Star Trek existing as a pop culture entity. And it's always been aspirational. This Star Trek episode says, there are people out there that are just too gross to deal with. So let's get rid of them. Let's make sure that they don't get into our shit. I saw it as, it was a really horribly anti-immigrant, anti-democratic, anti-progressive. It was horrible. And I could not believe that the powers that be, that the people that are controlling this IP allowed it to get made. This, plus another short take, obviously, that I talked about earlier, I don't get it, man. I really don't understand. I don't understand why is Star Trek being allowed to be turned into this? I don't know. It's not great. But I feel that this is problematic. This is a problem with all of our storytelling now. On one hand, we've got the second season of Foundation, and we've got the upcoming For All Mankind. And by the way, if you want to see how a great message of inclusion and progress are handled, watch For All Mankind. It does it right. All 3 seasons deal... one of the great depictions of what a progressive society can look like and move forward and be inclusive for everyone. I cannot stress For All Mankind enough. I'd like to believe, even though it's not this way, that For All Mankind, to a certain extent, Star Trek does exist in the universe of For All Mankind, but I'd like to believe that For All Mankind is somewhat analogous to the beginning of the Star Trek universe. And remember, it's an alternative history. Star Trek is not our history. Contrary to the belief of people like Akiva Goldsman, it's never supposed to have been our history. It's close, but it's not our history. If you haven't watched For All Mankind, catch up. The new season, 4th season, begins November 10th. And while the first season of Foundation I was iffy on, the second season turned out I was pretty impressed with where it went. At least is it Asimov? No, not really. But if you look at it as its own thing, I thought season 2 was pretty interesting. It went to places I didn't expect, and I was surprised by it. So check it out. Let's see what else we have here. Chemist says, I just want to tip my hat to you, sir, and show my appreciation and show some support for all that you do. Well, thank you, Chemist. I very much appreciate that. That's very nice of you to say. Thank you. Let's see. Scott Bartholomew said, Star Trek was deconsecrated in 2009. Yes, it's true. It is true. RRTNZ says, Hail, Bob. Okay, this was pronounced Cymriambith. Oh, it's Welsh, mate. Okay, it means Wales forever. I may live in New Zealand, but I will always be Welsh. Cumrian Biff. Okay, that's cool. I didn't know that. Scott Bartholomew asked me to talk about Worst Contact. I just did. Worst Contact is one of the worst things to ever come out of Star Trek, and I think it's shocking. All 3 of those episodes I've hated, but it's shocking. Mickey O says, interesting read, Rob, and thanks for sharing. Well, thank you. I want to thank Dan for bringing it to my attention. Thank you for that. So, okay. Now, let's see. I've got some letters. And this is interesting because, as I brought up earlier, I liked this. And I talked about Ta-Nehisi Coates, the writer that Damon Lindelof brought up when he was talking about writers out-woking each other, TV writers, that they all had to read Ta-Nehisi Coates. Now, this is really interesting. So this letter comes to me from Tyson Ramier. I want to say Ramier. Tyson, if I got your last name wrong, I apologize. Tyson writes, salutations. Mr. Burnett has discussed education and the liberal arts in the past, most recently regarding Frederick Douglass on Robservations 889, my last episode. I thought that he might find a recent article in the Washington Post relevant as well as interesting and more than a little troubling. In case no one has an account with the Post, he's attached a Word document of the article. This is very interesting. This is by Hannah Natanson, and this was published September 18th, 2023. And the headline is, this is, by the way, this is from the Washington Post. And her students reported her for a lesson on race. Can she trust them again? Chapin, South Carolina. As gold sunlight filtered into her kitchen, English teacher Mary Wood shouldered a worn leather bag with a first day of school items. 3 lesson planning notebooks, 2 peanut butter granola bars, an extra pair of socks, just in case. Everything was ready, but Wood didn't leave. For the first time since she started teaching 14 years ago, she was scared to go back to school. 6 months earlier, 2 of Wood's advanced placement English language and composition students had reported her to the school board for teaching about race. Wood had assigned her all-white class readings from Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. By the way, I've read this book, a book that dissects what it means to be black in America. And I would say this, it's a great book and everybody should read it. Do you have to take it as gospel? Can you not read anything else? No. But Between the World and Me is a really great book. It brings up some very interesting conversations. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a great writer. Look, you can read his work, and you might be angry about it. You might find it enlightening, but it doesn't mean that it precludes you to believe anything else. The students wrote in emails that book and accompanying videos that Wood, 47, played about systemic racism made them ashamed to be white, violating a South Carolina proviso that forbids teachers from making students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of their race. Reading Coates' book felt like reading hate propaganda toward white people, one student wrote. At least 2 parents complained, too. Within days, the school administrators ordered Wood to stop teaching the lesson. They placed a formal letter of reprimand in her file. It instructed her to keep teaching without discussing this issue with her students. Wood finished out the spring semester feeling defeated and betrayed, not only by her students, but by the school system that raised her. The high school Wood teaches in is the same one she attended. It had been a long summer since. Wood's predicament, when it became public in a local newspaper, divided her town. At school board meetings and in online Facebook groups, the citizens of wealthy, white, and conservative Chapin debated whether Wood should be fired. Republican state representatives showed up to a June meeting to blast her as a lawbreaker. The next month, a county NAACP leader declared her an advocate for the education of all students. The county GOP party formally censured the school board chair for failing to discipline Wood. Wood's case drew national polarizing attention. Conservative outlets and commentators decried Wood's race shaming against white people. Left-leaning media declared her a martyr to cancel culture, the latest casualty of raging debates over how to teach race, racism, and history that have engulfed the country since the coronavirus pandemic. South Carolina is one of 18 states to restrict education on race since 2021, according to an Education Week tally. At least half the country has passed laws that limit instruction on race, history, sex, or gender identity, per a Washington Post analysis. Wood is not the first teacher to get caught in the crossfire. The Post previously reported that at least 160 educators have lost their position since the pandemic due to political debates. Among them was a Tennessee teacher terminated for telling white students that white privilege is a fact. A Texas principal who lost his job for allegedly promoting critical race theory. A Wisconsin teacher who was dismissed after criticizing her district's decision to ban the song Rainbow Land, which lauds inclusivity. The month Wood had hoped to spend hiking, doing yoga, and vacationing carefree on the beach turned into a summer spent avoiding people's gazes at the grocery store and the gas station. Now she had to go back to school, which meant confronting the conundrum she had avoided at all summer. Wood believes that trust is fundamental to the classroom. She has to trust her students. They and their parents have to trust her. But trust, she believes, is impossible without authenticity. Amen. And for Wood, teaching authentically means assigning writers like Coates, voices unfamiliar, even disconcerting, to students in her lakeside town. Because of what happened last year, though, Wood, now worried anything from the most provocative essay to the least interesting comment about her weekend, might be resisted, recorded, and reported by the children she was supposed to be teaching. And if she couldn't trust them, how was she supposed to make them trust her? I should probably head out, Wood said to her husband, Ryan Satterwhite, glancing at the time on her oven's digital clock, 7:38 a.m. But she didn't move. I just didn't know what's going to happen. It'll be fine, Satterwhite told her, setting his mug down and crossing the room. She looked up at him and placed a hand on his chest. They stood framed in the front window for a moment, and he bent down to kiss her. Hopefully, she said, her mouth quirked into a half-smile, half-frown. She readjusted her bag, gripped her car keys, and walked out the door. The first complaint didn't alarm Wood. It was early February, a day after she gave out copies of Between the World and Me. A mother emailed asking to speak about an assignment. Wood didn't see it as different from the parental objections she was used to fielding in Lexington Richland School District 5, which serves roughly 17,000 students and is about two-thirds white. In interviews, several teachers recalled dealing with opinionated Chapin parents who pushed back against lessons or for better grades. Wood emailed, phoned, and left a voicemail message with the mom. Please call me back, she remembers saying. She figured they would chat and that would be the end of it. Wood thought she was on safe ground. She had taught Coates' book and accompanying YouTube videos titled Systemic Racism Explained and Unequal Opportunity Race the year prior. No one complained. She also counted on the fact AP Lang is supposed to be a high-level class. The College Board curriculum says it can address issues that might, from particular social, historical, or cultural viewpoints, be considered controversial, including references to race. Wood's supervisor, English Department Chair Tess Pratt, had signed off on Coates' book. Plus, Wood had required AP Lang students to read a speech from former President Donald Trump, a balancing conservative voice. And Wood believed the school district had come to accept her, respecting her students' 80+% AP exam passage rates year after year, above the national average, even if not everyone liked her methods. Chapin was her hometown. Chapin High School had been her school, the place she began to question the conservative Christian views espoused by her classmates, friends, and family. No teacher ever assigned her someone like Coates, Wood said, But her father, Mike Satterfield, a teacher and later principal at Chapin, encouraged her to pursue whatever outside reading she found interesting. That led her to left-leaning authors. By the time she graduated from University of North Carolina, Wilmington, she was a self-professed liberal. Satterfield capped his long career in education by winning a seat in the school board in November of 2022, and that made Wood feel safe too. Satterfield declined to comment beyond writing an email that said, "I love my daughter very much and respect her for the person that she is." She knew most students leaned right and guessed that many of her colleagues did too, based on their social media presence and offhand remarks. The popular circles at school are red, current, and former students said. But amid a red sea, Chapin's English department was a blue island, and Wood was known as the bluest of the bunch, conspicuous for decorating her classroom with posters of Malcolm X, Ruth Bader Ginsburg quotes, and LGBTQ pride stickers. She had that granola crunchy vibe, the former Chapin teacher, who spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of professional and personal retaliation, said, "It wouldn't be difficult to guess how she votes walking into her room. I think that's what made her a sort of lightning rod." Aubrey Hume, a recent Chapin graduate, recalls seeing the Malcolm X poster and immediately clocking that Wood thought differently from most people in town. She also taught black, female, and queer voices that most students never heard of in other classrooms nor at home, Hume said. "It was like, oh, I got Miss Wood, and now I have to scoff and roll my eyes because she's going to teach me things I don't want to learn," Hume, 18, recalled. A lot of kids did not like her. Elizabeth Jordan, now 20, was one of those students. Raised in a conservative Christian household, Jordan was unhappy to learn Wood would be her AP English teacher back in 2019, Jordan's senior year. At first, Jordan found Wood's lessons unsettling, especially the classes focused on mass shootings or transgender rights, during which Wood held up left-leaning viewpoints for students' introspection. Jordan could not understand why Wood was asking high schoolers to discuss controversial current events. "All I was thinking was, this isn't allowed," Jordan said, just because it was a complete 180 from anything I'd known. South Carolina had not yet passed its legal restrictions on what teachers can and can't say on these topics. Over the course of the year, though, Jordan's opinion shifted. She noticed how students seemed to pay more attention in Wood's class. She noticed that Wood never pushed students to adopt viewpoints, but challenged them to account for their convictions. Now a junior in college, Jordan still remembers the debate that followed after a popular boy, the student body president, said that transgender athletes should not be allowed to play sports. "Okay," Jordan recalls Wood saying, "can you explain that a bit more?" By 2023, when Wood assigned Coates, her strategy hadn't changed. She still gave difficult texts about hot-button issues, convinced it was the best way to keep students' attention, and teach them how to argue, an AP Lang exam requirement. She still demanded students consider novel perspectives, setting the essay question, "Explain Coates' problem with America's tradition of retelling history. Explain your support or disagreement with his position." For the 2 days Wood got to teach Between the World and Me, classroom discussions were lively and open, said Connor Bryant, 17, one of the students who took AP Lang last year. Bryant, whose father is a Chapin English teacher, said his peers debated systemic racism and what it's like to be black in America, agreeing and disagreeing with Coates, without Wood picking a side. "She did a really good job of keeping things not boring," Bryant said. "People spoke up and they had different opinions. I honestly didn't hear a single complaint about the book from anyone." Still, Bryant did remember a handful of disengaged students in the back of the room, and they whispered to each other during class. As in years past, Wood's style of teaching had left some students feeling uncomfortable. But this time, they didn't come to respect her. They reported her. The student email arrived in school board member Elizabeth Bernhardt's inbox at 8:51 p.m. on a Sunday, 4 days after Wood assigned Between the World and Me. The student thanked Bernhardt for looking into this matter. "I understand in AP Lang we are learning to develop an argument and have evidence to support it. Yet this topic is too heavy to discuss," the student wrote. According to the school records obtained by the Post, "I actually felt ashamed to be Caucasian." Another student email followed at 9:35 p.m. "I feel to an extent betrayed by Miss Woods," the second student wrote. I feel like she's built up this idea of expanding our mind through the introduction of controversial topics all year just to try and subtly indoctrinate our class. Especially troublesome, the student wrote, was one of Coates' sentences stating, "In America, it is traditional to destroy the black body. It is heritage." The student names were redacted from the emails obtained by Wood through a records request and provided to the Post. A parent who complained about Wood's course to the school did not answer a list of email questions. Bernhardt, who was endorsed by the Moms for Liberty last year, did not respond to a request for comment. The following Monday afternoon, Wood had finished teaching and was preparing to leave school when she received a call from the school secretary. The woman told her she had an unscheduled meeting with Chapin Assistant Principal of Instruction Melissa McGee and the district's Director of Secondary Instruction, Nashunda Walters, at 4 p.m. The woman didn't say what the meeting was about, but Wood guessed. She grabbed Pratt, the English department chair, and one of her best friends, hoping for protection, and she pulled up the AP Lang course description on her laptop, figuring she might need it. Wood and Pratt were waiting outside a conference room for over a half an hour, and they later recalled, through a window in the door, Pratt said she could see McGee and Walters sifting through pages of documents in a manila folder. Around 4:30, Wood and Pratt said they were let into the room, but Walters dismissed Pratt over her protests, the department chair said. She kept waiting outside as Wood underwent what the English teacher later described as an interrogation. A set of administrative talking points prepared ahead of the meeting, obtained through Wood's records request and given to the Post, show that McGee and Walters were supposed to start by telling Wood her teaching had sparked concerns. They were supposed to mention the South Carolina policy against making students uncomfortable because of their race. They were supposed to remind her of school rules stipulating that teachers will not attempt, directly or indirectly, to limit or control students' judgment concerning any issue, and that the principal must approve supplementary materials for classes. They were supposed to let her talk about Coates' book and her reason for assigning it, but the verdict was already determined. This assignment could run in conflict with proviso and policies, the talking points said. We need to cease this assignment. It is unclear who wrote the talking points. The school did not answer a list of emailed questions about the documents. Wood said the meeting proceeded almost exactly as the talking points laid out. She tried to defend herself. She cited the AP Lang course description, quoting the part that said it was okay for teachers to assign controversial texts. She said the purpose of this lesson was for students to hear a stimulating argument that they could explore and critique. McGee and Walters let her talk. After she finished, Wood recalls Walters delivered a 2-word order: pause instruction related to Coates' book. The district did not answer questions about the meeting nor make McGee or Walters available for interviews. Superintendent Aki E. Ross, Sr., declined to discuss any aspect of Wood's lesson or its fallout, noting the district does not comment on specific staff members or incidents. Ross wrote in a statement that we want our students to be critical thinkers with the ability to develop their own understanding of the world, he added. There will be times when students or parents disagree with issues discussed in class. The best way to resolve these matters is communication between the family and the teacher. The school gave Wood 2 days off for teaching for professional development, she said, so she could come up with something to replace Coates' book, which she supposed was to teach for the next 3 weeks. A substitute taught her classes in the meantime. Now, you get the point of this article, and I'm going to put the, if you want to read the rest of it, I'm going to put it in the, this goes to the Washington Post. I'm going to put it in the live chat. Now, here's what I don't understand. I mean, I do understand it. I know where we're at. So I put it in the live chat. The world we live in, ideas don't hurt. They don't. You know, when you are thinking or talking or reading about something, it should not hurt you. Even if you vehemently disagree with something you're reading in a book, you can always close that book and put it on a shelf. I don't understand why in our civilization, certainly the same problem that I have with modern Star Trek is telling me, it's people, by the way, that I don't respect. I don't respect somebody that comes along and tells me, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong, because I know better than you do. Well, if you know better than I do, you shouldn't be writing the way you're writing because your stories suck. I'm a very discerning student and consumer of storytelling. I've been doing it my whole life. I know what stories are good and what stories are bad, and you're writing bad stories. And you're writing stories where you take the position that you know better than me, and you're trying to tell me something. Now, somebody like Ta-Nehisi Coates, you can be rest assured, Between the World and Me and all that, it's a good book. It's a tough book. It's a book that you might not agree with, but it's not going to hurt you. And it's presenting a point of view that you might not have considered. That's what education is. Now, do I think that there are subjects that people shouldn't be taught until they get to a certain age? Yes. I think that, there was a reason why when I learned sex education, which was taught in the 5th and 6th grade, you had to find out from a parent. And basically, they told you the mechanics of reproduction, but they didn't get into sexuality. I don't think anybody who was in the 5th grade, we were 10, 11, we understood those concepts anyway. Today, everybody wants to teach everything right away. I think you have to develop, you learn about certain concepts as you get older, as you have more experience and learn more. The idea that in this country, we shouldn't hear opposing points of view or be confronted by ideas that are difficult for us to accept or agree with or even consider, I don't get that. We're strong people. It's not going to hurt you to mull over someone else's point of view. And you know what? If you really hate somebody, try looking into what they believe, because learning how to refute their arguments through your own cogent discourse is a great skill set to have. And why people are only want to listen to stay in their echo chambers, I don't get that at all. I mean, people criticize me. They're like, Rob, why do you read these articles? Because I like to hear what everybody has to say. It helps me sort of understand my own points of view. If your faith or your belief systems are not strong enough to withstand opposing viewpoints or ideas, maybe you should rethink your point of view and your faith. Because if you're a person of faith and that's carried you through, certainly you should understand your faith enough to use that in the arguments and the things. Don't run away from an argument. Use your faith to help you win an argument. The more you know, the better off you're going to be. And the more you know about opposing viewpoints other than your own, the better off you're going to be. Because then you can understand where other people are coming from, and you can engage in the discourse, and you can have the armor and the armament to both protect yourself and go after those bad ideas, which I think is necessary. And I don't understand, why people don't do that. So Tyson, I want to thank you for writing in and sending in this letter, because, to hear that a teacher, that Ta-Nehisi Coates book is a good book. You don't have to agree with it all. And if you're a white person and you feel bad about our America's past, there's nothing wrong with that. We were really shitty to people of color. We were shitty to the Chinese. We were shitty to the Jews because we didn't help them during World War II. We were shitty to the Irish. We were shitty to the Italians. We were shitty to the indigenous people that lived here. We were... And you know what? That's true of everybody everywhere. Everybody was shitty to somebody in the past. It's just, who were we the shittiest to? And I think that once you understand that that's human history, don't take it personally when someone goes back and shows you what it was like and how Black America has no generational wealth. How Black America wasn't allowed to avail themselves of the GI Bill at the end of World War II, much less what slavery did. We've been shitty to Black people in this country, even to this day. You don't have to feel guilty about it. Just do something about it. Just be more aware of it. And if somebody points it out, if Ta-Nehisi Coates wants to write a book, you know what? Learn something. Don't sit there and say, I feel bad about being white. Well, yeah, okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Understand why you feel bad. Understand what Ta-Nehisi Coates is trying to point out. I don't believe in reparations, but he made a good case for him. Why not understand what he was saying? Because knowledge is power, even if it's knowledge that might be uncomfortable to you. You can't ever go wrong learning more. At least that's the way I think. What do you guys think? I don't know. You might feel differently. This comes from David Fairclough. David Fairclough, I think. Hi, Rob. Thanks for your YouTube shows. Although Let's Get Physical Media cost me serious cash and hoping to convince me to finally go 4K. Having just retired from teaching after 32 years, 15 teaching film studies, I have time to engage with your discussions on the state of the film industry. The film industry has adapted to many challenges, from the coming of sound, the Hays Code, the Paramount Decree, television, home video, and latterly streaming. The experience of experiencing a film with a group of complete strangers has a unique and ongoing appeal, and will persist. God, I hope so. We've gone from the cheap Nickelodeons through grand cinema palaces seating thousands to the multiplex. It may mutate again, but there will always be a paying public for this experience. Given film's origins early last century, it was very definitely focused on entertainment and revenue. Films were sold as strips. Exhibitors literally bought them by the foot. Even at this stage, spectacle proved popular and remakes were not uncommon, although this was sometimes because the original print had worn out, though over duplication. The key here is the pursuit of popular appeal. Films that would bring in the customers paying ticket prices aimed at general audiences. This led to film being the first truly large-scale popular art form not to have its initial parameters defined by the wealthy elite. Prior to that, novels, theater, painting initially existed in a world of patronage and gatekeeping, bolstered by wealth and education. Film was initially snubbed as lowbrow by cultural elites. Famous stage actors in those early films insisting their names not be included in the credits in fear of their reputations. From this, the popular has continued to dominate over the critically acclaimed. Just look at the difference between popular and critics' top tens of all time. How many of our favorite films would not exist if the canon was determined by what was deemed worthy? As a film studies teacher, this is something I would often bump up against when attending events with colleagues. When asked what I had been to see, the conversation often went something like this. Me: I went to see the Transformers movie. It was great. Colleague: really? A dumb kids movie with a dumb story, one-dimensional characters, and Michael Bay, for God's sake? Me: look, I paid for 2.5 hours of giant robots kicking the crap out of each other, and it didn't disappoint. Colleague: to each their own, I guess. Me: I've also been to see the latest Ken Loach film, and I enjoyed it just as much. The difference being is I didn't come out of that film praising its story, themes, and characters, but dismissing it because it didn't have enough giant robots in it. I guess the point I was trying to make was that there has to be some attempt to judge things on their own terms. Just a few random thoughts. Cheers, Dave. Well, Dave, what a great letter, and let me tell you, I totally agree. I mean, here's the thing. If you watched the Transformers movies, Michael Bay's 5 Transformers movies? I think you could even look at them as a genre unto themselves. And you can say, of those 5 Transformers movies, which are the best? I think the first Transformers movie that he made is probably the best, although I do think the battle at the end's a little incoherent. I also really like Dark of the Moon. And I love the 45-minute Battle of Chicago because some of the most incredible visual effects ever are there. So even within the Michael Bay pantheon or canon of Transformers movies, you have 5 you can judge. There's one that's always going to be at the top and others not so much. I think number 5 is probably at the bottom. But I agree with you. Just like I can enjoy the Shaw Brothers, the Super Inframan, even though it's kind of an Ultraman ripoff made in China with a villain named Princess Dragon Mom, but I love it. And you can love it. And I think that this idea that you can only like highbrow things, and the example you gave is perfectly all right. I mean, and the thing is, there's a whole genre of giant robot movies. And there's, I don't know if there's the Gone with the Wind. You know what? I might say, now that I'm thinking about it, now that you've, in my mind, and I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's perfect. But I would say that Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim is right up there. As far as giant robot movies kicking the shit out of kaiju monsters go, might be, I think, the best. Could very well be. And, if those are the only movies that you ever see, I would definitely say Pacific Rim is right up there. And it's not without its faults, to be honest. So I agree. I totally agree. This next letter comes from Joe from Montreal. and it's entitled The Continental and Mel Gibson. Hey, Rob, I could not care less for a John Wick spinoff. I'm not the biggest fan of the series, having disliked the last 2 films. I'm in the minority, but a world where everyone and their mother is a deadly assassin bores me. I miss the simplicity of the first film, a lean and mean 90 minutes with barely a plot. What I care about is every review commenting on Mel Gibson's past. I get it. He did bad things. What I hate is nitpicking who gets a pass and who doesn't. If we look at the last 40 years of movie and TV, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who isn't stained. Some of the biggest stars have public skeletons, but only a few make it into the headlines, either depending on the project at the moment or the size and severity of the past scandal. If you don't like it, don't watch it. It's that simple. Thanks, Joe. Well, I mean, for me, I'll be honest. I mean, I like you, feel that the simplicity of the John Wick franchise in the first film was the best. You know, I love that glimpse, but like you said, when they suddenly take out a contract on John Wick and everybody and their mother, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of assassins everywhere, it seems kind of silly. And for me, it kind of ruined the speciality of it all. You know, I kind of thought that there should only be like 100 assassins in the world, but there just seems to be, it just gets ridiculous how many people he kills. But the first John Wick movie, I think, is really, really good. And it was a lot of fun to watch that movie and get a glimpse of that mythology. Now I think, like you, to be honest, the first movie I think is way better. And John Wick 2 is okay. John Wick 3, half of it really bored me. And John Wick 4, I thought there's a lot of cool stuff in there, but way, way, way too much. But the first movie, chef's kiss. Really enjoyed it. I think that's great. Let's see this next one. Let's see. What can I read? This one comes from Marianne. Ooh, this is a good letter. A difference of opinion. Dear Mr. Burnett, I am a fellow geek and a cinephile. I'm still learning, though. And I was prompted to write this letter because of your description of Zack Snyder from a recent show. I was saddened by a comment you made regarding Sucker Punch. And yes, while Sucker Punch is considered his weakest movie, I would disagree. Army of the Dead is his weakest. We can agree on that. I hated Army of the Dead, and I was excited to see it because his Dawn of the Dead surprised me. There's no doubt that Sucker Punch also has attained a fan base. For myself and a lot of other lovers of that movie, something clicked, made us emotional. Watching it for the first time, I was just entranced. I didn't quite fully understand it, but I felt I was mesmerized and felt some sort of catharsis. I don't want to get into the reasons why the movie made me feel that way. It's quite personal, but it helped me a lot. After another rewatch, I was starting to understand what made me react the way I did. Then I searched if there were any interviews or commentaries from Zack about the movie, and luckily there were. As I was listening to him, I was shouting, yes! He completely explained why I love the movie and had that experience. I don't know how, but he managed to honestly portray some of my fears, battles, and victories in it. Your comment about the movie saying Zack Snyder didn't know about that when he made the movie disappointed me a little. I can guarantee you he most certainly did. A fair criticism would have been, I get the message Zack Snyder tried to tell, but it got completely lost in the theatricality of the movie. I would have disagreed with you, but I couldn't say it was wrong. After all, you are in the majority regarding the quality of the movie. As we come from different perspectives, that is what you felt about it, and that's completely fair. You also said how Zack is mostly like a cool painter, but that there's not much beneath all that, no nuance. Again, a fair criticism. I would, of course, disagree with it, but it's subjective. I sometimes feel that you really give him a lot less credit than he deserves. But again, an opinion. For me, he was always a humanist first, with something really sincere and nuanced about his work. And for you to describe that some of his fans like his movies because of something he did or not intend to do was really disappointing, especially coming from a filmmaker like you, because he most certainly did intend these things. That comes from Marianne. Marianne, great letter. Thank you for that. Okay. Elizabeth and I did a whining about movies, which you can find on this channel, about Sucker Punch, and I would suggest you delve into it. Now, here's the thing. There has been a lot of examination into Sucker Punch about what it has to say about a lot of different things, psychological things, abuse, a lot of things, and what Zack Snyder was trying to do and get by with. I would say that all of that is definitely valid, but in the context of what that movie is and how he goes about doing it, was he as successful as he might have wanted to be, and did a lot of the audience get that message from the movie? I don't know. But I do think I understand where you're coming from, and I've heard a lot of other people, a lot of women actually, say that that movie means a lot to them for various reasons, which I found fascinating. And of course, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong because it meant something to you, and you can't, no one's going to tell you that it didn't, because it did. And I've read articles about Sucker Punch that deal with this. My whole thing about Zack Snyder is, and remember, I've said many times that I completely objected to the idea of a Dawn of the Dead remake because it's one of my favorite movies, not just horror films, but favorite movies. I couldn't believe anybody was going to do it. And I walked into that movie, which is, I think, the first Zack Snyder feature film. I've never been so primed to hate a movie in my life. I went in like Ahsoka. That's how I felt. And I liked it. I was surprised. There's a lot in that movie that I really enjoyed. I don't think it besmirched the memory of the original. And for what it was, I thought it was okay, you know? And I am a big Man of Steel, a staunch supporter of Man of Steel. And I've heard a fair amount of interviews with Zack Snyder, and he's a very likable guy. Watchmen's one of my favorite, the comic is one of my favorite things in the world. But I think that I'm not really sure. I think Zack Snyder loves Watchmen, and I think Watchmen is a great recreation of the comic. I don't think it's a necessarily great adaptation of the comic. And, you know, he's done weird things, like I said on that conversation. I don't understand why he used Wagner, why Ride of the Valkyries is in that movie, because Ride of the Valkyries is a pop culture sense memory from Coppola's Apocalypse Now, which by evoking, or even The Sound of Silence, you know, using that over the comedian's death. I thought it's a little bit on the nose. And sometimes I think as a filmmaker, like you said myself, or at least aspiring filmmaker, that some of his choices are heavy-handed and a little obvious. And it makes me wonder what he's got going on. But I have enjoyed Zack Snyder's movies, and as far as his, I have said, as much as I like Man of Steel and I liked his Justice League, because I like, in my own mind, the Justice League are very operatic. I mean, his Justice League is very much Wagner. It's very much all three of those movies, the Justice League trilogy or Superman trilogy, call it what you want. But it's the Sturm and Drang of those things. It's very much of a piece. They're not real deep, but I mean, they're, you know, like I said, they're van paintings from the 70s. They're the cover of metal albums. You know, Iron Maiden, the same kind of thing, you know, with their Eddie, or take your pick, whatever character you want, whether it's, that's what Zack Snyder does. I don't think he's a very deep filmmaker. I just don't. What he is he's a showman, you know, and he'll if Zack Snyder fronted a metal band, he would probably front Kiss, or definitely something like Kiss. Kiss might be too colorful. He would have subdued the colors on Ace Frehley's costume. But I don't think you're wrong, but I think there's some middle ground. But don't see, again, I think if you want to love Sucker Punch and you've gotten something out of it and it means something to you, don't let someone like me tell you that it's not, that you're wrong, or that it's not worth, because if you got something out of it, you personally got something out of it, no one can take that away from you. And I think nowadays people are too quick to take criticism of art personally if they like the art. I mean, don't let anybody, just because someone says something out, someone criticizes something that you like. Here's the thing: you listen to their criticism like you did, and you wrote me a letter. That's the way to do it. And we can have a conversation. I'm not going to tell you, well, you're just, man, you don't know what you're talking about. I would never say that to you. And I appreciate the fact that you like Sucker Punch. I mean, look, I'll tell you this. Sucker Punch is a bonkers movie. And I think it's a lot of fun to watch. I thoroughly enjoy watching that movie. I don't think it's a particularly good movie, but I certainly like watching it. I own it. I think I don't own a 4K of it. I own it on Blu-ray. But, I own a lot of Zack Snyder's movies. I own 300 in 4K. I own The Watchmen in 4K. I own Man of Steel. In 4K. I have Justice League in 4K. I've got Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice in 4K. I think I have Dawn of the Dead in 4K now. I think I do. But it's a great letter, and I want to thank you for writing it in. You guys are great. I mean, come on. What's not to love about all this, the great stuff that you send me? Let's see. Destiny Captain sends in a tip and says, Rob, what do you make of the color palette for SFS? Search for Spock. I think it's one of the best looking films of the TOS film era. You know what? I'm conflicted about Search for Spock. On one hand, I think Leonard Nimoy's direction is incredibly pedestrian in that film. Because, look, it's his first movie. But there are scenes in it that I think are great. Like when Sarek mind melds with Kirk in his apartment. I love that scene. I love James Horner's score in that scene. I love the way he did that. I think it's amazing. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's got some great stuff in it. But on the other hand, when you go into like when Kirk's having drinks with Starfleet Command, or when they go into that, when McCoy goes into that bar, your planet, welcome. Not so much. I can understand you're talking about the color palette though. I mean, there's a lot going on. I think ILM's effects are beautiful in that. I think it has some of the best ILM effects in that movie. I really do. And I think it looks great. So the color palette, I'm conflicted about that movie. Let's just say on many levels. But, I think it does look good. Scott Bartholomew says, I want to see a movie adaptation of a Trek novel. It's past time. I'd love to see Prime Directive done. I really would. Prime Directive is a banger. Joe Panora says, I can't wait for All Mankind. You still doing the after show with Bill? Well, Bill's been working on his book. I don't know if we have time. I still would like to do it. I really would. I mean, maybe we'll do it in sections, but I would like to do the show leading up to the season 4's launching on November 10th. I can't wait. The Red French Moon says, I'm always learning with you, sir. Have you watched the One Piece live action show? Opinion or not your jam? I loved it. I've never watched the anime. I've watched 2 episodes of the live action show. I think it's a lot of fun. I think its brand of anime whimsy is not always my jam. It's a little, I like whimsy, but in a different way. Like I was talking earlier, give me Galaxy Express 999 or give me Space Battleship Yamato or even Message from Space with a big giant sailing ship in space. I'm into that. But watching people defy physics the way that, it's a little tough for me. But on this, I will say this. One Piece is a lot of fun. It commits, I think what it does do is it commits to the whimsy of anime and its source material, which also the manga, the idea of the manga, which I think a lot of Western adaptations of, and that's why I like the Wachowski Speed Racer. Actually, I loved it. I thought, while not, it goes way too far as an anime adaptation goes, but it has that whimsy that I think that is missing from a lot of translations of anime. It's definitely, there's a reason why One Piece is working for people. And I do like it, and I do want to watch the rest of it. I do. And I think that I'm glad you're digging it. I mean, a lot of people are digging it. It got renewed for season 2, so good on everybody. Roberto Suarez, our own Roberto Suarez, sends in a tip and says, these short treks are embarrassing. Instead of investing the talent of these artists to celebrate the animated series, we get humorless trash. Imagine if these episodes instead followed a time-spanning story in the animated series style. What a missed opportunity. Amen. Amen. Joe Panora is saying, R&B, the writer's strike is over per deadline. Wow. Okay. Breaking news. Let's go see this right now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Breaking news. It's a deal. The WGA and the AMPTP reach a tentative agreement to end the writer's strike. This is by David Robb, Dominic Patton, and Anthony D'Alessandro. This is from 7/16, an hour ago. Updated with WGA, AMPTP, a joint statement. A joint statement. The Writers Guild has reached a tentative agreement with the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers to end its strike after nearly 5 months. Bravo, folks. The parties finalized the framework of the deal on Sunday when they were able to untangle their stalemate over AI and writing room staffing levels. The WGA and the AMPTP have reached a tentative agreement, the Writers Guild and the AMPTP said in a joint statement this evening. Now you can believe it. We have reached a tentative agreement on a new 2023 minimum, an MBA, which means minimum basic agreement, which is to say an agreement in principle on all deal points subject to drafting final contract language. The WGA told its members in a release which came just after sunset and the start of the Yom Kippur holiday that many had seen to be the deadline to wrap up after 5 days of long negotiations, which is interesting because Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is when we Jews, you have to go before God and admit what you've done wrong. You don't get absolved of your sins, but you have to go before God and admit what you've done wrong so you know what you've done. You're not absolved, so it's kind of interesting that this happened on this day. Details of the WGA's tentative agreement have not been released but will be revealed by the Guild in advance of membership ratification votes. Next steps in the process will see the Ellen Stutzman-led WGA negotiating committee vote on whether to recommend the agreement and send it on to the WGAW board and the WGA Writers Guild of America East Council for approval. So West and East, tentatively scheduled for Tuesday, the Guild said tonight. Pending those votes, the WGA told its members that it is still on strike, but that all picketing is hereby suspended. Read the Guild's full statement to its members below. Virtual discussions began mid-afternoon, blah, 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 blah. Let's read their statement. Here is the WGA's statement to its members. Dear members, we have reached a tentative agreement on a new 2023 minimum basic agreement, which is to say an agreement in principle on all deal points subject to drafting the final contract language. What we have won in this contract, most particularly everything we've gained since May 2nd, is due to the willingness of this membership to exercise its power, to demonstrate its solidarity, to work side by side to endure the pain and uncertainty of the past 146 days. It is the leverage generated by your strike in concert with the extraordinary support of our union siblings that finally brought the companies back to the table to make a deal. We can say with great pride that this deal is exceptional, with meaningful gains and protections for writers in every sector of the membership. What remains now is for our staff to make sure everything we've agreed to is codified in a final contract language, and though we are eager to share the details of what has been achieved with you, we cannot do that until the last I is dotted. To do so would complicate our ability to finish the job, so as you have been patient with us before, we ask you to be patient again one last time. Once the memorandum of agreement with the AMPTP it's not the minimum basic agreement, it's a memorandum. No, it is memorandum, okay. Once the memorandum of agreement with the AMPTP is complete, The negotiating committee will vote on whether to recommend the agreement and send it out to the WGAW board and WGA. So it's Writers Guild West and Writers Guild East for approval. The board and council will then vote on whether to authorize a contract ratification vote by the membership. If that last authorization is approved, the board and council would also vote on whether to lift the restraining order at the end of the strike at a certain date and time, pending ratification. This would allow writers to return to work during the ratification vote, but would not affect the membership's right to make final determination or contract approval. Immediately after those leadership votes, which are tentatively scheduled for Tuesday if the language is settled, we will provide a comprehensive summary on the deal points and the memorandum of agreement. We will also convene meetings where members will have the opportunity to learn more about and assess the deal before voting on ratification. To be clear, no one is to return to work until specifically authorized by the Guild. We are still on strike until then, but we are, as of today, suspending WJ picketing. Instead, if you are able, we encourage you to join the SAG after picket lines this week. So SAG is still on strike, but the WGA is not. Finally, we appreciated your patience. Well, I mean, it's still on strike, but you don't have to picket. Finally, we appreciate your patience as you waited for news from us and had to fend off rumors during the last few days of negotiation. Please wait for further information from the Guild. We will have more to share with you in the coming days as we finalize the contract language and go through our union's processes. As always, thank you for your support. You will hear from us again very soon. Well, this is very exciting. You go, WGA. That's very great, and I want to thank our friend Joe Panora for hipping me to this new breaking news. Thank you for that. RRTNZ says, good effort with the Welsh pronunciation, mate. Mahler would be impressed. I love Man of Steel. It's got some big flaws, especially Pa Kent, but got a lot more right, including the bombastic action. I think so, too. Ernest Rister says, Dear Earl of Erudition, what are your thoughts on The Exorcist versus The Exorcist, the version you've never before seen? The director prefers the theatrical release, Amadeus and Dances with Wolves. I'm annoyed by the misleading marketing. Okay, here's the thing. For me, the definitive version of The Exorcist is the theatrical version. William Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist and wrote the novel it was based on, there was a couple of scenes that he wanted in. One was a brief exchange between Father Merritt and Father Karras about why Reagan McNeil. And when Father Marin gives he basically says, well, because it's the innocent girl was to trip us up. I think that's a mistake. I understand why he wanted it in there, but I think it's more horrifying to not, like, why her, they don't know. Then there's a conversation about at the end of the film, which it's kinder. And then, of course, there's the spider walk sequence, which I've always hated because it looks a little too goofy. You can tell she's suspended. It's not the greatest thing in the world. I don't dig. It's fine. I much prefer the theatrical version. Jacob Schnorr says, is anime a branch of media that could be affected if the strike had gone on? I don't think so, especially anime made in Japan. I don't think so. Red French Moon says, immediately following your advice, sir, I don't care what others are saying. Waterworld is a good movie. I love it. I love Waterworld. You know, and if you get the Arrow release, the Arrow disc release, it has, what is it called? It's not, I want to say the Poseidon version. It's not the Poseidon version. It's the something version that's got the TV cut. It's got more stuff in it. I mean, you know, I understand it's Mad Max on the water, but there's a lot to like in Waterworld. It's pretty cool. I like it. Ernest Rister goes on to say, The Exorcist, Amadeus, Dances with Wolves, those aren't director's cuts. Costner himself told Entertainment Weekly he had nothing to do with the longer cut, and Milos Forman hated the extra scenes with Salieri. Look, I agree. I like the longer Dances with Wolves. I do. I do not like the director's cut of Amadeus, and it hasn't been, the original theatrical version hasn't been available in a long time because when they actually, well, I can't say why. I'm not supposed to know why. But let's just say it was really dumb the way they made the director's cut of Amadeus, quote-unquote director's cut, the long version, the extended version. So, yeah. But I like the longer version of Dances with Wolves because I think, I don't know which version you're talking about, because I think there's one that he actually did. Like, I love the one when you see John Dunbar, like, at the beginning before he heads off. Like, he's like Death by Firing Squad or Suicide by Firing Squad and all that. So, yeah. Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, kind souls, I am going to end this show, this version, this Robservations episode 890 or 890. We end on a great note. The Writers Guild strike is, for all intents and purposes, over. So congratulations to the WJW and the WGA East. Congratulations. Let's get back to work. I bet everybody's pissed that they moved like Dune 2 to March of 2024. Move it back. Although Taylor Swift might conquer the universe before then. So, the Swift is life after all. Which is a bummer that we're not getting a lot of movies that were moved into 2024. But I think we'll all survive. And so will theater owners, because Taylor Swift made sure of that. I want to thank everybody for writing in. If you want to write me a letter, postgeeksingularity.com. Please do so. It's free. Send me letters. And if you want to comment below, share, like. Got to get those likes. I mean, it helps the analytics, helps the channel. And, I have if you want, use the letter. If there's a topic that you want me to discuss or look into that might not necessarily be topical, like news of the day, but something more of broad entertainment industry concern or movies or something like that, send it in. Send me ideas for what you would like me to observe over. I'd like that. People don't do that very much. They might suggest occasionally, hey, you might want to do this with an upcoming observations. But, because, and I have to say, the people out there, you imagination connoisseurs, the level of discourse in the letters I've been getting, even the letters when they take me to task, pretty damn good. You should all be proud of yourselves. I really appreciate hearing from you. That's what this channel is all about. It is about the free exchange of thoughts. And here's the thing. If somebody thinks differently than you do, try and understand why they think that way. Don't get mad. Don't scream and yell. Don't. If somebody doesn't like something that you like, don't take it personally. Try and understand where they're coming from. I feel that we've really lost the ability to think, to understand. I mean, it's really important later in life. Learning to anticipate. I mean, anybody knows if you have an adversary, learn to think like them. It's like when George C. Scott kicked Rommel's ass in Patton. I read your book, Rommel. There's going up against this incredibly fearsome German tank commander. What do you do? I read your book. I learned how you thought. It's a good way to be. It's a good way to, you look at people you dislike, try and understand why they think the way they think. Don't just write people off. I mean, if somebody's a pop culture figure and has written novels and has been very influential or whatever, to write somebody like that off is, I think, wrong. You want to figure out why are they influential? What's going on with them? Talk about it. Anyway, on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. Oh, right. That's the whole philosophy of this channel. See? I want to I can't even speak. What was that word I couldn't pronounce? I want to thank everybody for generously supporting the channel via super chats, tips, and memberships. Thanks for everybody who came to the member call this weekend. It was a lot of fun. I want to thank, Roberto Suarez has been moderating. Tom Jr. Jackson has been moderating. And as Tom Jr. Jackson will tell you, we are all goof people. And on that note, have a better night.